Hi, my name is Carson Senor. I'm in Nandi Crosby's Sociology third class, and today I'll be talking about education reform and my viewpoint and stance on it. So let's get started. Uh, Number one, I'm going to be talking about positive relationships with teachers to students. Secondly, I'm going to give some quotes from a TED Talk I watched on a professor who taught over 40 years in Texas schooling systems. Her name is Rita Pierson. And then also I'm going to give a microanalysis example of, a scenario where teacher to students are interacting and the positive behind it. Also, I'm going to move on to a brief macro analysis. It's not going to get too in depth. I just kind of talk about how it looks in the macro level, and then also how I think that our education reform system solely relates to symbolic interactionism. So let's get started. Number one, and this is the main thing around my whole thought process towards our education system is positive relationships, being with teachers to students. There's a quote that Rita Pierson said in her TED Talk, and she was talking to a colleague, and the colleague mentioned that they don't get paid enough to like the kids. They just get paid enough to teach the curriculum material, and the kids are supposed to learn it, and it ends at that. And her response was saying that, there's never been a kid who's learned from somebody they don't like. So if a kid doesn't like you, they're not going to learn from you. So that right there, it just defeats the whole quote of what that colleague said. And I really do agree with that. Is because if a kid doesn't like you, they're not going to learn. They just don't want to be around you. And it's simple. It's it goes across all ages of youth. So if they're not comfortable around you, they're not going to open up to you. They're not going to learn. And so that flaw right there is huge. So moving on, I'm going to go to the microanalysis, and this kind of hits on that same thing I just talked about, with the positive relationships and kids needing to listen to you and what you're going to get out of it. So the micro example is talking about a teacher had a kid, who wasn't the smartest in the class, got 18 wrong at a 20 answer question. Got 18 wrong out of a 20 question test. So instead of writing negative 18 on the top of the paper, she wrote positive 2 and a happy face next to it. And the kid came up to her and was like, why I got 18 wrong on this test? Why'd you give me a happy face and that +2 on paper when I got, majority of the test wrong? She said, well, you may not be getting all of them right at the same pace as the rest of the class, but you didn't get all of them wrong. You still got 2 right out of that 20 question test. So you're on the right path. You just need to keep at it, And the happy face is just saying, hey, it's a good job. You didn't get all of them wrong. You're not out of it. You got 2 right, and you're just going to keep moving forward. You need to keep moving on. And that, in turn, really gave confidence behind that kid. And later on that semester, she started seeing higher grades from that kid because, he had that feeling of like, hey, she still thinks that I can do something, even though I'm not doing it at the pace of like the kids that are getting the 16 or 17s out of those 20 answer tests. She has faith in me. And I think that turns around in the big picture of that student having confidence going into the next test, the next quiz, and getting higher scores from that. It's all just a confidence boost with these kids. If a kid feels confident, sky's the limit for that kid. It really is. It's really simple that way. So moving forward to a very brief macro analysis is just kind of, from these micro analysis like I just mentioned happening over and over again, and you see these positive results from that. It leads to higher scores and on tests, so higher grades. You get higher attendance rates because kids actually want to be there and actually learn. And I imagine that a kid actually wants to be in a class and learn. And then it's an overall positive thing for our education. It boosts it up. So in the end, we can start getting materialistic things of people wanting to fund the schools because they see results from these kids getting higher grades. And don't get me wrong, when I talk about this, I'm not oblivious. I know that positive relationships are not the only factor that feed into our education reform and making it a better system. I get that there's poverty. I know there's socioeconomic locations that are worse off than others. There's schools that cannot teach certain subjects, don't have materials to teach certain subjects. So, I get that. I understand that that's a huge issue. But where my emphasis is at the very small building blocks of our education system, being our youth and our students in the system. Because I think in the long run, 15, 20 years down the road, if we're doing these small, if we're building up these kids that are going to be running our country in 15 to 20 years, is going to be very, very much more positive for us as a nation moving forward with our education. So I'm going to end this talk with a couple quotes that I have learned, not learned, but I saw in the video. But first I want to relate it to symbolic interactionism. And basically all it is just, interacting with the teacher to student. The reason I'm so passionate about what I'm talking about is because I currently work with high risk youth and low risk youth, so I see it day in and day out with having to build relationships with kids. And I've had situations on both sides of the fence. I've had kids who haven't been able to form those positive relationships with, and they keep a distance because they don't know me and I don't know them. So nothing positive comes out of that. But the turnaround on that is that I do have some kids, where I've worked with them day in and day out, and I've stuck it out with them and just kept boosting them up, kept giving them confidence, even when they didn't have that confidence themselves. They can be that kid who gets the 18 out of 20 wrong. But if you give them that sliver of, hope or faith saying, hey, you're not out of this, you can keep going at it, that is astronomically, influences a kid more than you ever know. I have kids that I can, 3 years ago I was teaching, and they come up to me today saying, hey, man, I know back in 6th grade when I was a little punk, we might have butted heads a little bit now, but, I'm going into my 9th grade year, freshman year of high school, and I'm a different man because of you. And until you hear that from a former student or a member that you have, I don't think you really relate to that feeling. That's a feeling that cannot be described in words. And so it's a positive thing for everybody, And I think that this quote that Rita Pierson ends her TED Talk with is very, very cool. And I don't get very emotional with TED Talks, but this last quote that she ended her video with, kind of made me tear up when I watched it. So I'm going to read it off to you and end my talk on this. All right. So what she ended her talk with was saying that, what we do as teachers, both teaching and learning, should bring joy, and how it would feel if we had kids who are not afraid to take risks and who are not afraid to think outside the box or even think in general, just to give a voice for themselves. What would it be like if every kid had a champion? Because, in the end, the champions that these kids deserve are these teachers and these staff members and mentors that are there for these youth that are going to eventually be running our country, So carrying on off of that, she also goes on to talk about, and any adult who will never give up on them understands the power of connection and insists that they become the best that they could possibly be in his or her job as educators. And she goes on to say that also, is it hard to be an educator? Hell yeah, it is. I have days where I'm dealing with my youth and I think that there's no light at the end of the tunnel. But, it's not impossible. We can do this. And as educators, there's no greater feeling than seeing your youth or your student prevail or overcome an obstacle. I just think we need more of that, man. We need more teachers that are as passionate as how I am with my youth, man. I put my heart and soul into what I do. And if we have more educators like that truly do care about making these positive foundations and positive relationships with these kids, man, our education system is going to go through the roof. I mean, I truly do believe that down in my heart and soul, that positive relationships with students to teachers is, if not the most important, up there with the top 5 of our education reform systems. Because our youth is our future. And if our future is looking like it is right now with our education systems, I don't even know what to think about our future is going to look like. All right. Thank you.